Cue the trumpets and the lights, and the images of adoring crowds cheering on because Peter Dutton has a policy. Let me repeat that. Peter Dutton has a policy. Yes, the battle lines have just been drawn. And that policy, no, it's not nuclear. Nuclear is just a distraction, never going to happen. It's not fruit picking for retired Australians either. It is tax cuts. Why they just don't splash money from a helicopter in the marginal seats, we don't know. But tax cuts are the go. It was leaked to Phil Coorey in the Fin Review. Meanwhile, in a leak to The Australian, apparently from the Greens this morning, my enemy's enemy is my friend. We won't call you evil green Hamas people, for at least one day. Adam Bant is expected to announce it to the National Press Club lunch today. That is $500 million to be got from multinational tax avoiders, the fossil fuel exporters who don't pay much tax, if any, anyway. And so we're going to hear about that today. So Peter still has not sallied forth with his nuclear energy costings, but now he doesn't need to because he has established his reverse Robin Hood policy. Rob from the poor to give to the rich. It is a policy nonetheless, though. We've got a class warfare election on our hands. He's gone the full Donald, has Peter. We'll still get the fear-mongering over immigrants and outsiders to target the outer suburban seats of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. That's the strategy. But now there's an enticement to claw back the teal votes from those latte-sipping, goat's cheese-eating teal voters in the affluent neighbourhoods. Because as Michael Pascoe explains on the website today, the coalition will be stripping the HAF. That's Labor's policy. Its Housing Affordability Future Fund plan, which is designed to address the housing crisis. They're going to strip that and give the money to higher income earners in good old tax cuts. Mind you, those earning 150, they're struggling too. It is tough out there. And so it's on. The class warfare election. The leak in the Oz today from the Greens has just signalled a $514 billion in new big business taxes in return for supporting Labor in a hung parliament. Yes, those who can afford to actually pay the taxes, so that is actually good policy because, of course, the Greens don't get much in the way of donations from fossil fuel exporting foreign multinationals. Elbows in the middle, just clinging to that middle, perhaps centre-rightish ground. A minority government is an increasing likelihood. As Susan Lee has been saying, telling Sky News in recent days, the coalition aims to cut $100 billion from Labor programs, stripping $100 billion from policies, actual policies enacted by Labor, and spraying those tax cuts, presumably, to aspirational voters. So bugger the climate, bugger the EV subsidies, they're gone, they'll get axed. An actually significant Labor policy, that's the $20 billion new economy spend, the Future Made in Australia program. Well, it wasn't mentioned in the Coorey leak and the Fin Review, but we can assume that that's as good as gone too, to get to Susan's $100 billion. So if the coalition comes in, it's going to dump all that stuff and give it in tax cuts to higher income Australians. What vision? What sheer vision? Peter doesn't want a future made in Australia. He wants tax cuts. He wants to be the Donald of Australia. Labor's HAF, in any case, the housing money was just borrowed money anyway. It wasn't really much of a policy, but it was something. It sort of enshrines that idea of the choice for the major parties in Australia. Bad versus less bad. A little something versus nothing. See, that $10 billion was basically a loan from the government to our very own war crimes investor, the Future Fund. That's our sovereign wealth fund, which invests in Elbit Systems, Israel's biggest weapons manufacturer. The company whose drones murdered Zomi Frankham and thousands of Palestinian men, women and children. That's our Future Fund. So the housing money was going to come from the market returns from the Future Fund on the government loan. They should just set up a government housing corporation. But of course, that's not neoliberal enough. But this is something, and Peter's pledged to dump that. It was something perhaps to keep a few Australians off the park bench at night. But now it's welcome to the 2025 election. Bad versus pretty ordinary. If you're struggling, don't worry. The economics, you'll be hearing about this. You'll be told that the tax cuts are going to spur economic growth, that they're economically sound. It's trickle down, you see. Give money to people with more money, and it will trickle down to ordinary people in the economy. Very old school. Bugger inflation, the game is on. It's all happening. Labor's just hit the unis with a foreign students cap. Smashed the unis, as the AFR puts it today. Smashed them. And meanwhile, here's the Greens hooking up with the CFMEU, which is a big Labor funder. Headlines say, absolute destruction of Labor is the aim of the CFMEU. So it's all happening behind the scenes as well. You can imagine the shock and the horror, losing the CFMEU money in donations. It's many tens of millions of dollars, all hidden. And big business? What a poor old big business. As the Murdoch minions, the Australian newspaper lamented this morning, they have been left out in the doghouse. They've been left out in the doghouse, those poor large corporations. Well, that tends to happen when an election nears. And the majors say their quiet apologies to their donors, but we have to focus on getting votes now. So what have we got here, really? Well, all the polling apparently shows that there's very little chance of the coalition scraping in to even minority government, but they are having a swing at it with the tax cuts because they need the teal seats, and they need, with the immigration stuff, the outer suburban seats. So tax cuts for high-income earners, and there's little choice. But the fossil media duopoly, News Corp and Nine, will focus on the fight between the majors, while the real policy fight is between the majors and the Greens and the independents. New gas project approvals, they're on the same page on that. The majors, they're more or less on the same page with Gaza, although Libs are full Benjamin Netanyahu and Labor is deeply concerned. But let's fight against the Houthis anyway. They're both on the same page with AUKUS, that dreadful deal which makes Australia the 51st state of the US, a US airbase for a looming war with China. Meanwhile, the demographics are relentless. They are only pushing in one direction. The political research of the parties and the newspapers, duopoly knows this. They show that people under 35 aren't reading mainstream media, aren't watching old fossil media TV networks. So we have an election where it's bad versus less bad. This is a narrative which will be showcased, and they'll try to forget about third parties. And the Greens, they've lost the under 35s. They don't vote necessarily like their parents. It's last century politics. And so we remain, at least for another term, adrift in a vast sea of neoliberalism with not too much in real policy, although it is heading in the direction of a more diverse parliament, more deals to be done. The two majors under threat. And we can see that. We saw it at the NT election, the Northern Territory election on the weekend. We saw the shift to independents and Greens, particularly in Darwin, where they were worried about the petrochemicals port, the middle arm development, which we're subsidising for foreign multinational gas exporters. We can see it in the raft of by-elections since the federal election, and we see it in the last federal election numbers too. Labor did win. Labor got their majority, but only just. And since then, the third parties have risen and the independents. The Queensland election is the next one, and that will be extremely interesting. We've wondered for a couple of years whether this is just a trend which will be reversed in a couple of terms of government, but it looks like it's a permanent trend, perhaps in Australia, the rise of third parties and independents at the expense of the majors. Like, share and comment in the section below, and thank you very much for your support.